The quiet evening air carried the soft chirping of crickets as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving behind streaks of orange and purple across the sky. The small town was peaceful, its streets nearly empty, except for a little girl named Emily and her loyal companion, a large German shepherd named Shadow. Emily, just 9 years old, had a spirit as bright as the fireflies flickering around her. She giggled as she skipped along the sidewalk, her tiny fingers clutching Shadow's leash. The dog walked calmly beside her, his ears perked, his sharp eyes always scanning the surroundings. Emily had taken this route home dozens of times. The path cut through the edge of a wooded park, a shortcut that saved her a few minutes before reaching her quiet neighborhood. Her mother always reminded her not to stay out too late, but Emily loved these little evening walks with Shadow. He wasn't just a pet. He was family. What most people didn't know, though, was that Shadow wasn't an ordinary dog. He had been trained as a K9, disciplined, intelligent, and fiercely protective. But to Emily, he was simply her best friend. As they strolled along, Emily hummed a tune, her blonde pigtails bouncing with each step. Shadow's tail swayed slightly, his powerful body moving with effortless grace. Everything felt normal, peaceful, safe. Then, the sound of engines shattered the calm. A low, rumbling noise echoed through the streets, growing louder by the second. Emily stopped in her tracks, her small hands tightening around the leash. Shadow's body stiffened instantly, his ears twitching toward the direction of the sound. A second later, the source of the noise came into view. Motorcycles. 3 of them. Their headlights cut through the dimming light, their riders clad in dark jackets and helmets, faces obscured by tinted visors. Emily swallowed hard. She had never seen these bikers before. They weren't from around here. The motorcycles slowed as they neared, then came to a stop just a few feet away. The engines idled loudly, the deep growl of the machines vibrating through the pavement. The lead biker, the biggest of the 3, tilted his helmeted head slightly as he looked at Emily. "Hey there, kid," he said, his voice muffled by the helmet. "You lost?" Emily shook her head quickly, gripping Shadow's leash tighter. "No, I'm just going home." The biker chuckled, a sound that sent a strange chill down her spine. "It's kinda late for a little girl to be out alone, don't you think?" Emily glanced at Shadow. He hadn't moved, but she could feel the tension in his body, the way his muscles were coiled beneath his thick fur. He was watching, waiting. The second biker, a lanky man with a skull design on his helmet, leaned forward slightly. "Maybe we should help her find her way, huh?" he said with a smirk. Emily's heart pounded. Something about their tone felt wrong. She took a small step back, her fingers trembling as they gripped Shadow's leash. She wanted to run. She wanted to turn around and bolt, but her feet felt frozen in place. The third biker, silent until now, finally spoke. "What's with the dog?" The leader laughed. "Just a pet, man. Ain't no problem." But he was wrong. So very wrong. Shadow didn't move, but his sharp eyes locked onto the men, his gaze cold and calculating. He had seen threats before. He had been trained to sense danger. And right now, he knew exactly what these men were. A low growl rumbled from deep in Shadow's throat. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. Enough to make the leader hesitate for the first time. Emily's breath came quick and shallow. She knew Shadow would protect her. But she also knew that if things went wrong, she had to be ready. And then, one of the bikers made a move. Shadow reacted instantly. And that's when everything changed. The air seemed to thicken as the biker on the left, the one with the skull design on his helmet, swung his leg off his motorcycle and took a step forward. His boots crunched against the pavement, the sound sharp in the silence. Emily's breath hitched. Her fingers trembled around Shadow's leash, but the dog stood firm, his body rigid like a coiled spring. His ears flattened slightly, his golden brown eyes locked onto the man as if he could see straight through him. "Easy there, kid," the biker said, raising his gloved hands slightly. His voice had an edge of amusement, but there was something else beneath it. Something that made Emily's stomach twist. "We're just being friendly." Shadow let out another low growl, this time a warning, deep and rumbling. The sound sent a chill through Emily, but at the same time, it reassured her. Shadow wasn't scared. He was waiting, watching. The leader of the group, the biggest one, shifted slightly, his helmet tilting toward the dog. "That's a mean-looking mutt you got there," he muttered. "What's his name?" Emily hesitated. She didn't want to answer, but something in the way they were staring at her made her realize they weren't just going to let her walk away. "Shadow," she finally said, her voice small. The leader let out a low chuckle. "Shadow, huh? That's a tough name for a little girl's dog." "He's not just a dog," Emily said before she could stop herself. Her voice was stronger this time, but her hands still trembled. She knew she had to be careful with her words. These men didn't seem like the type to walk away just because she asked them to. The biker with the skull helmet smirked. "Oh yeah. What is he then? A superhero?" Emily didn't answer. Shadow's growling had stopped, but his stance had changed. His muscles were tense, ready. He was waiting for a reason, a single move, a single sign that Emily was in danger. The leader took a slow step forward, and that was enough. In an instant, Shadow's body sprang into action. His deep, powerful bark echoed through the empty street, a sharp contrast to the stillness from moments before. The sudden explosion of sound made the leader stop short, his foot pausing mid-step. Shadow's stance was different now. He wasn't just warning them anymore. He was daring them. The leader's hands curled into fists at his sides. "TCH. What's with this dog?" The second biker, the quiet one, finally spoke again. His voice was lower, almost hesitant. "Man, I don't think that's just any dog." Emily's pulse pounded in her ears. They were starting to realize it. Shadow wasn't normal. He wasn't just a pet. The leader scoffed, shaking his head. "So what? It's still just a dog." The biker with the skull helmet looked at Shadow again, longer this time. Then his smirk faded just slightly. "No, I don't think it is." A strange silence stretched between them. The leader's posture shifted, his hands loosening at his sides, his weight shifting ever so slightly like he was reconsidering something. Emily didn't know what they were planning, but she could tell they were thinking, calculating. Then, for the first time, Emily saw uncertainty in their body language. They weren't as sure as they had been a moment ago. Maybe they hadn't expected the dog to react like this. Maybe they thought she would just be scared and run. But she wasn't alone. She had Shadow. The leader exhaled sharply. "Look, kid. We're not looking for trouble." His tone had changed, but Emily didn't trust it. It felt like a mask. "We were just messing around. No harm, all right." Emily didn't believe him. She felt her heartbeat against her ribs, her breathing shallow. Her instincts told her to turn and run, but she knew better. Running would make her look weak. Running would make them think she was prey. So she did the only thing she could. She stood her ground. Shadow didn't move, but he was still watching, still ready. Emily tightened her grip on the leash, even though she knew Shadow didn't really need it. He wasn't going anywhere unless she told him to. The leader let out a slow sigh, then turned his head slightly toward the other two bikers. "Let's go." Emily's body tensed. Was it really that easy? The biker with the skull helmet hesitated, but after a moment, he swung his leg back over his motorcycle. The quiet one followed. The leader was the last to move, his head turning toward Emily one more time. Even though his face was hidden behind his helmet, she could feel his eyes on her. "Be careful out here, kid," he said, his voice quieter now. "You never know who you'll run into." With that, the engines roared to life again, breaking the silence like a crack of thunder. The three motorcycles rumbled away, their red taillights fading into the distance. Emily stood frozen for a long moment, her breath still caught in her throat. She felt like she had been holding it the entire time. Then, finally, she let it out in a shaky exhale. Shadow relaxed, his ears perking back up, his tail giving a slight wag as he looked up at her, almost as if to say, "It's okay now." But Emily wasn't sure it was okay. Because even though they were gone, something about the way the leader had looked at her before leaving unsettled her. The way he had spoken, the way he had hesitated. She didn't think this was over. And neither did Shadow. The quiet returned, but it felt different now. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the pavement as Emily stood there, gripping Shadow's leash. Her heart was still pounding, her legs felt shaky, but she wasn't sure if it was fear or the adrenaline still racing through her. Shadow, standing beside her, wasn't growling anymore, but his body was still tense, his ears flicking in the direction the bikers had disappeared. She knew she had to get home. Taking a deep breath, she forced her feet to move, Shadow matching her pace as they walked quickly down the path toward her neighborhood. The shortcut didn't feel as safe as it usually did. Every rustling leaf, every distant sound made her flinch. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see those motorcycle headlights returning, but they never did. By the time she reached her house, the sky had turned a deep shade of blue, the stars beginning to peek through. The porch light was on, casting a warm glow over the front steps. Emily's mother had probably turned it on, waiting for her to come home. She hesitated before stepping inside. Shadow, standing close to her side, looked up at her as if sensing her hesitation. She reached down and ran her fingers through his thick fur. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered. "You knew they weren't just messing around." Shadow didn't respond, of course, but the way he stood there, silent and watchful, told her enough. She opened the door and stepped inside, the familiar scent of home wrapping around her. The sound of the TV came from the living room, and her mother's voice called out, "Emily? That you?" Emily swallowed hard before answering. "Yeah, it's me." Her mother appeared in the hallway, her eyebrows raising as she saw the look on Emily's face. "You okay? You look a little pale." Emily forced a nod, not sure how to explain what had happened. "Yeah, just got a little spooked walking home." Her mother sighed, shaking her head. "I told you not to take that shortcut so late. It's not safe." Emily wanted to argue, to say she had Shadow and he would never let anything happen to her. But after what just happened, she wasn't so sure anymore. Shadow had protected her, but what if those bikers hadn't left? What if they had pushed things further? "I won't take it again," she said quietly. Her mother studied her for a moment before nodding. "All right. Go wash up for dinner." Emily did as she was told, but her mind was still racing. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the way the leader of the bikers had looked at her before leaving. His words echoed in her mind. "Be careful out here, kid. You never know who you'll run into." It hadn't sounded like a warning. It had sounded like a promise. Shadow lay at the foot of her bed, his body curled up but his eyes still open. He hadn't fully relaxed either. Emily knew that meant something. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined the roar of motorcycle engines, the shadowy figures standing in the dim light, their voices laced with something unspoken. And deep down, she knew this wasn't over. The next day at school, Emily found it hard to focus. Her mind kept drifting back to the night before, replaying every detail. It didn't help that the town wasn't very big, and rumors spread quickly. By lunchtime, she had overheard whispers from other kids about a group of bikers seen near the park. "They were just hanging around near the old gas station," one boy was saying. "My brother saw them last night. Said they didn't look like they were from here." Emily's stomach twisted. The old gas station wasn't far from where she had run into them. Another girl chimed in, lowering her voice. "I heard they've been asking about people." "Like who?" someone else asked. Emily froze, her hands tightening around her lunch tray. "Dunno," the girl said with a shrug. "Just heard they were looking for someone." Emily felt her pulse quicken. She didn't need to guess. She already knew. She pushed her food around her plate, barely eating. When the final bell rang, she hurried home, Shadow greeting her at the door like always. But this time, she closed the door behind her and knelt down beside him. "They're still here," she whispered, stroking his fur. "They're looking for me." Shadow pressed his nose against her hand, his warm breath against her skin. She knew what he was telling her. "You're not alone." But that didn't stop the fear from creeping in. That evening, Emily stayed inside. Her mother didn't notice anything unusual, but Emily kept glancing out the window, expecting to see the bikers outside. Hours passed, and nothing happened. Maybe, just maybe, she had overreacted. Maybe they really had just been messing around. But then, as she was getting ready for bed, a sound outside made her freeze. The low, distant hum of motorcycle engines. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs. She rushed to the window, peering out into the night. Down the street, near the corner, the faint glow of headlights flickered. The shape of 3 motorcycles sat idle, barely visible in the darkness. They weren't moving. They weren't leaving. They were waiting. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she stared out the window. The motorcycles sat motionless at the corner, their engines humming low, steady, like a warning. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows over the pavement, but she could make out their dark figures. They weren't moving. They weren't coming closer. But they also weren't leaving. Her fingers gripped the windowsill. She could feel the tension in her body, the creeping sense of unease tightening around her chest. Shadow, who had been resting near her bed, lifted his head. His ears twitched. He had heard it too. Emily swallowed hard and backed away from the window, her mind racing. What did they want? Why were they still here? Were they just trying to scare her, or was there something more? She didn't want to find out. Carefully, she pulled the curtain shut, her hands trembling. She turned to Shadow, who was already standing now, alert. He was watching her, waiting. "Mom's in the living room," she whispered to him, as if he could understand every word. "I can't tell her. She'll freak out." Shadow's gaze didn't waver. Emily took a deep breath and tiptoed to the hallway. Her mother was on the couch, flipping through channels, oblivious to what was happening outside. Emily thought about saying something, but what would she even say? That a group of bikers had followed her home? That they were sitting at the corner of their street, watching? She could already hear the doubt in her mother's voice. "You must be imagining things, Emily. It's probably just someone passing through." No. She had to handle this herself. She turned back toward her room, but before she could take another step, a noise outside made her freeze. A sharp rev of an engine. Then another. The sound sliced through the quiet night, sending a shiver down her spine. Emily hurried back to her window and carefully pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek out. The bikers hadn't moved from the corner, but the leader, the one who had spoken to her the night before, had turned his head slightly, as if he knew she was watching. Her stomach twisted. He knew. Shadow let out a low growl, pacing near the door now. His body was rigid, tense. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears. She had to do something. She couldn't just sit here and wait for them to make a move. She grabbed her phone and hesitated. Should she call the police? No, by the time they got here, the bikers could be gone. And what if they really weren't doing anything illegal? What if they just denied everything? Her thumb hovered over the screen, her thoughts spinning in circles. Then, suddenly, the motorcycles started moving. Slowly, methodically. They rolled forward, their engines still low, controlled. Emily's breath hitched. They were coming down the street. Shadow moved closer to her, his body tense, his eyes locked on the window as if he could see through the curtains. The bikers weren't speeding. They weren't making a scene. But they were making a statement. They knew where she lived. Emily's hands felt clammy as she clutched her phone. She could hear the engines growing louder, closer. She counted the seconds in her head. 5, 4, 3, 2. Then, silence. Emily forced herself to move. She pressed against the curtain again, peeking through a tiny gap. The motorcycles had stopped. Right in front of her house. Emily's breath came in shallow gasps. Her fingers tightened around her phone. The leader lifted a hand and slowly removed his helmet. His face was shadowed by the dim streetlights, but she could see his eyes. Cold. Calculated. He tilted his head slightly, as if considering something. Then, without breaking eye contact, he did something that sent a chill through her entire body. He smirked. A slow, deliberate smile that said, "I know you're watching." Shadow let out a snarl, his teeth flashing in the dim light of the room. Then, as suddenly as they had come, the bikers revved their engines again and rolled away, disappearing into the night. Emily stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. They weren't in a hurry. They weren't running. They wanted her to know that they could come back. And deep down, she knew they would. Emily stood frozen by the window, her breath shallow, her mind racing. The bikers were gone, but their message was clear: they could come back any time. Shadow stood stiff beside her, his fur bristling, his eyes locked on the empty street as if expecting them to return. The house was eerily silent, but Emily could still hear the distant rumble of engines fading into the night. She knew she should move, do something, anything, but her legs felt heavy, as if rooted to the floor. A cold dread settled in her stomach. And then, her phone buzzed. The sound made her jump, her heart hammering against her ribs. Hands shaking, she looked down at the screen. Unknown number. A lump formed in her throat. She stared at the glowing screen, her mind screaming, "Don't answer it," but her fingers moved on their own. She swiped to accept the call and hesitantly brought the phone to her ear. For a moment, there was nothing, just silence. Then a voice, low, steady, and too calm. "Nice dog you've got." Emily's blood ran cold. Her grip on the phone tightened. "Who is this?" she demanded, though she already knew the answer. A soft chuckle came through the speaker. "Thought you should know, we don't like unfinished business." A chill crawled down her spine. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, the line went dead. Emily pulled the phone away and stared at the screen. The call had ended. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. She turned toward Shadow, who was still standing alert, his body coiled with tension. This wasn't just a scare tactic anymore. They were watching her. She knew she had to do something, but what? Call the police? Her mother? Tell someone at school? Would anyone even believe her? She paced the room, gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. She needed help, but from who? Then an idea hit her. She stopped pacing and looked at Shadow. His ears perked up, sensing her change in energy. Her father had trained him, not just as a guard dog, but a real canine. Shadow wasn't just a pet. He was highly trained, capable, and dangerous when needed. Emily took a shaky breath. If these guys thought they were dealing with just another scared kid, they were wrong. She dropped to her knees and placed both hands on either side of Shadow's face. His deep brown eyes locked onto hers. "We're not running," she whispered. Shadow didn't blink, didn't move. But she knew he understood. They were going to fight back. But before Emily could even begin to plan her next move, a noise outside made her freeze. A single click. It was quiet, barely audible, but it came from the front porch. Her stomach flipped. Slowly, carefully, she crept toward the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see. And her blood ran cold. A dark figure stood at the edge of their porch. Not on a bike. Not at the end of the street. Right outside her house. The figure didn't move, didn't knock, didn't say anything. Just stood there. Watching. Emily's breath hitched as she stood frozen by the window, her eyes locked on the dark figure outside. The porch light cast a dim glow, barely illuminating the silhouette of a man standing eerily still. He wasn't knocking. He wasn't speaking. He was just there. Shadow let out a low, deep growl, his body tense, muscles coiled like a spring ready to snap. Emily's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to wake her mother, to call the police. But she couldn't. If she moved too suddenly, would he try to break in? Her phone was still clutched in her hand, but her fingers were too stiff to dial. She forced herself to breathe, to think. Shadow was trained. Her father had made sure of that. But would he be enough if this man tried to get inside? Then, as if sensing her fear, the figure finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his jacket. Emily's stomach dropped. Her legs reacted before her mind could. She stumbled back from the window, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Shadow's growl grew deeper, his stance shifting into full alert mode. Then, a knock. Not loud. Not forceful. Just 3 soft, deliberate taps. Emily's hands trembled as she backed further into the room. The air felt thick, suffocating. Then, a voice. Calm. Casual. Wrong. I know you're in there, kid. Her knees nearly buckled. It was him. The leader. The one from the gas station. The one from the phone call. Shadow let out a sharp bark, snapping Emily out of her daze. No more waiting. She grabbed her phone and hit the emergency dial. The ringing felt like it lasted forever before a dispatcher picked up. But before Emily could even get the words out, Shadow's body tensed, then lunged. A loud crash sounded from the front door. The man had moved. Shadow bolted toward the noise, snarling as Emily heard hurried footsteps outside. She ran after him, just in time to hear the roar of motorcycles in the distance. She skidded to a stop near the front door, heart hammering. Peeking through the peephole, she saw the porch was empty. They were leaving. Or at least, it looked like they were. She heard her mother stirring in the other room, mumbling in confusion. But before Emily could decide what to do next, her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She shouldn't answer. She knew that. But something told her she had to. She pressed it to her ear. Silence. Then, laughter. Not loud. Not forced. Just a soft, amused chuckle. Then the same calm voice. You're lucky, kid. A pause. But luck runs out. The call ended. Emily's entire body went cold. Shadow stood by the door, his body still rigid, his eyes locked on something outside she couldn't see. It was over. For now. But she knew this wasn't the end. Emily stood in the silence of her home, her heartbeat still unsteady. The air felt heavy, charged with something unspoken, like the echo of a threat that hadn't fully left. She gripped her phone so tightly her fingers ached. The call had ended, but the words still lingered in her mind. You're lucky, kid. But luck runs out. Shadow remained at the door, his ears twitching, his breathing controlled but alert. His presence was the only thing keeping her grounded, keeping her from spiraling into panic. She forced herself to breathe, to think, to remind herself that the bikers were gone. For now. A noise behind her made her turn sharply. Her mother stood in the hallway, her eyes still heavy with sleep, confusion etched across her face. Emily. Her voice was groggy. What are you doing? Emily swallowed hard. She couldn't tell her everything. Not yet. If she did, her mother would panic, maybe even pack up and leave town. And that wasn't an option. Just Just checking something, she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. I thought I heard something outside. Her mother sighed and rubbed her forehead. It's late. Go back to bed. Emily nodded, though she knew sleep wouldn't come. Not tonight. Not after this. Her mother turned back toward her room, and Emily hesitated for a second before locking the front door. Then she double-checked the windows, securing them all. The house was safe. At least as safe as it could be. She crouched down beside Shadow, running a hand through his fur. He finally relaxed just a little, his tail giving one slow wag, as if to say I'm here. Emily wasn't sure how long she sat there, but eventually, exhaustion won. She climbed back into bed, keeping her phone on her nightstand, Shadow curled up beside her. The last thing she remembered was the sound of his steady breathing before sleep finally pulled her under. Morning came too fast. The sun was barely rising when Emily woke to the distant hum of an engine outside. Panic jolted through her body before she realized it was just a passing car. She pushed back the blankets, stretching out her stiff limbs. Shadow stood beside her, yawning before standing up and shaking out his fur. The night before felt unreal, like a bad dream, but the lingering fear in her chest told her otherwise. She picked up her phone and checked her call log. The number was still there. Unknown. She couldn't just let this go. After getting dressed, she grabbed her backpack and knelt in front of Shadow, rubbing his ears. We're not letting them scare us, she murmured. Right? Shadow licked her hand, his warm gaze locked onto hers. Taking a deep breath, Emily left her room and headed toward the kitchen, where her mother was making coffee. The smell filled the house, familiar and comforting. You're up early, her mother said, glancing at her over the rim of her mug. Yeah, Emily replied, trying to sound casual. Couldn't sleep. Her mother nodded, not pressing further. As Emily grabbed some toast, she debated whether to say something. Not everything, but enough to warn her. There were some guys outside last night, she said carefully. On motorcycles. Her mother's expression hardened. Did they do anything? No, Emily admitted. But I don't think it was random. Her mother set down her mug. Emily, if someone's bothering you, we need to call the police. Emily hesitated. She wanted to believe that was enough, but deep down, she wasn't sure. They're gone now, she said. I just thought you should know. Her mother studied her for a long moment, then nodded. If they come back, we're reporting it. No arguments. Emily nodded. She wasn't going to argue, but she also wasn't going to wait around, hoping they never returned. After breakfast, she grabbed her backpack and opened the front door, stepping onto the porch. The morning air was crisp, the street calm. But something caught her eye. A small object on the ground, near the edge of the porch. Frowning, she stepped closer and bent down. It was a patch. A biker patch. The design was simple, black and red, with a snarling wolf's head in the center. A warning. Emily's grip tightened around the fabric. She looked out at the empty street, her jaw clenching. They wanted her to know they weren't gone for good, but they had no idea who they were really dealing with. She straightened up, her pulse steady now. She wasn't the scared girl from last night anymore. They thought she was just another target. They were wrong. She turned back toward the house, Shadow following closely behind. This wasn't over. Not yet.